Okay, thanks for coming. So I am Stelios Christodoulou. I'm going to talk about GitHub Codespaces. I'm a data analyst. I use Python, but I'm afraid this will be a bit of an infrastructure talk, if you don't mind. There'll be a bit of Python there. There'll be a bit of data analysis there, but probably will be more infrastructure than anything else. Do I use my keyboard to change? Or?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, you can move that around. It's pretty easy.
Yeah. So a bit of history. I was thinking of that joke about Chuck Norris was born in the cabin that he built with his bare hands. You know that? Linus Torvalds is like the software equivalent. Like the guy created the Linux kernel with his bare hands, and then he didn't like the version control, so he created Git. So we start from here, 2005. Git is created, and from Git, you have these few companies that decided to make Git their product, like managed hosted Git. GitHub is probably the most famous. And by 2018, Microsoft saw the light that open source is not terrible and we can work with open source. So it helped getting rid of Ballmer and getting Satya Nadella in place. So they acquired GitHub. I guess the important thing about this story is that Microsoft at that point was like a cloud provider. They had Azure cloud infrastructure. So there was a bit of synergies for GitHub to use this Azure infrastructure. So as soon as the acquisition happens, 2018, by the next year, you see the first product launches, which is GitHub Actions. So you can set up like continuous integration, continuous deployment of the code in GitHub, which means every time you do a commit, every time you do a pull request, it will spin up one of these runner virtual machines. You have the choice between Ubuntu and Windows. It will do some tests on your code, and maybe the person who does the code review can see the result of the tests and say, actually, no, go back, fix it, as opposed to just looking at your code. Or maybe it will deploy it and that kind of stuff. So Codespaces is kind of sitting on the same infrastructure. It's the same VMs that originally were used for the continuous integration, continuous development, and they are making them available as a development environment. So this time you have a human user. It's not just you set up a kind of pipeline that every time I commit, it will spin a VM. No, I go as a human user. I get the VM. I run VS Code on it. I write my code. I run my code. So this is what happened to my contribution in the year of 2022. I went to PyData London in the summer. I got a bit inspired. I did a few things, started a couple of repositories. I wasn't doing much. And then down here, Codespaces gets released, and suddenly my kind of hobby development versus other life balance got a bit upset, let's say. You see, it's mostly Saturdays and Sundays. So what do you get from GitHub? You get the repositories. You get things like pull requests we mentioned when you send your code for review. You get issues, so any bugs you find, any features you want, anything you want to report to a project, you do it via issues. There is projects, which is like a Trello kind of board. If you want to project manage, I don't think many people use that. Discussions in some of the big open source projects, they have, instead of doing all the discussion in issues, they have like a separate discussion kind of forum. Copilot AI, obviously everybody doesn't want to code anymore. We want AI to code for us. But yeah, Codespace is part of that, all that offering. And it's infrastructure. So what kind of infrastructure, what options do you have? As a kind of free user, you get the 120 hours, but you have to divide that by the number of cores. So in my case, if I use 2 cores, I'll get 60 hours. If I use 4 cores, I will get 30 hours a month. 30 hours a month is probably a good life balance kind of limit. If you're on the Pro, you get more hours. And you also have the option of different regions. Obviously, if you're here, you want to use Europe West in terms of lag, possibly in terms of your data not being sent to America, but it's Microsoft anyway, so it doesn't matter. If you pay, then you have these other options. You can go above the 4 cores. You can get all these beefier machines. I think someone was asking about GPUs on Matrix. Yeah, so I haven't figured out a way to get GPUs on this. I think
I looked it up and it said you can't suggest it Azure instead.
sorry, that is
Suggested using something like an Azure VM or,
okay.
or something.
Yeah, I think if you go to a proper cloud provider like Azure, first of all, you can decouple the cores from the memory. So like we use Google Cloud at work, and you can get a machine that has a lot of memory and not that many cores, or a machine that has a lot of cores and not that much memory, and you pay for those two separately. So if you had the kind of workload that requires a lot of memory but not processing, or a lot of processing and not memory, it's better value for money. Whereas here it's just scaling. You get more cores, you get more memory. So it's not the most flexible cloud provider. It is what it is. Interesting, there was a hot off the press announcement on the action side. You could get a single core, but I haven't seen that being made available for Codespaces, so you cannot get your 120 hours, unfortunately. All you can is you're stuck to the 2 cores limit. On actions, it actually tells you that this is Azure region, North Central US, whatever. So it is Azure in the end. And it's the same stuff. Now, if you want GPUs, the gray stuff is from Colab. The white stuff is from Kaggle. So both of those are sitting on top of Google infrastructure, and they're very much geared towards data scientists. So they give you the option of GPU or TPU. TPU is a Google-specific thing. I think it was optimized for TensorFlow originally, but yeah, it's not. If you compare basically Codespaces to Kaggle and Colab, this is an area where those two win, and Codespaces can't give you acceleration of this sort. The other option you have on GitHub is actually maybe you don't need a machine, maybe you just need an editor. So if you just press dot on while you're looking at the file, you get a kind of VS Code environment, but there's no runtime. You cannot really run any code. You can just edit. It's just an online editor. The integration is a good thing. So like this is the menu you get within your own repository. You can create a new code space, or you can, if you have an existing code space, it will show it in there. You have the option of opening it in browser, which basically means VS Code in browser. Or you might have Visual Studio Code on your machine, and you get the Visual Studio Code on your machine to talk to the code space. Or you might be using Jupyter Lab, which is what I tend to use. It depends what you're used to, what you like. I'll show a few options at the very end, which they're not really, they're more for kind of front-end web development as well. There are ways to configure code space for those. And yeah, the interesting thing, another integration it has with GitHub, it will tell you things like, oh, your code space has uncommitted changes, which I think the average code provider, the average cloud provider won't tell you this. Oh, you have a VM and it's got uncommitted changes. Don't delete the VM. You're going to lose your code. This thing does it. The tricky part here is you need to look at your gitignore file, because it could be that the uncommitted changes are outputs you don't care about, that you're never going to commit. So there are ways within Git to define, actually, I don't care about this and this file type. I will never commit them, ignore them. They're not for Git, they're local output. And what GitHub does, I think of GitHub basically as something that makes Git easy for everybody. You don't have to be a Git guru. So one of the things it does, it lets you, when you create the repo, it lets you choose a template for your git ignore. So you basically say, this is a Python repository, and it has like some templates. Okay, for a Python repository, I will ignore this and this and this and this. If it was a Perl repository, I would ignore different things because that's the outputs I expect from Perl. These are the outputs I expect from Python, that kind of thing. This is a small part of the git ignore of the Python template. I don't know if there are any Django or Flask people in the room. Yeah, I'll come back to that at the end. But yeah, so you create like a local SQLite with.
Yeah. I use SQLite, Flask, Postgres.
So you don't want the SQLite files to be committed to Git.
Yeah, that usually goes into an instance folder though, which is noted there.
Okay.
Which Flask is usually creates for you an instance folder.
So it ignores all the instance folder in that case.
It's usually where you put the SQLite stuff.
Scrapey, I'm not sure what Scrapey is. Does anybody know what Scrapey is?
Web scraping framework.
Okay, like Beautiful Soup and so on. It's a different one.
It actually has its own parser for parsing HTML, but it handles the kind of scraping links from pages and then following the links if necessary, and then saving the data to either a database or a JSON file or something like that. It's quite neat. It's a little bit over-engineered if you just want to throw together a scraper, but it's good if you want to go a bit further.
Yeah, Sphinx is the documentation one. PyBuilder, again, anybody knows PyBuilder? Anybody used PyBuilder? Jupyter is the one I'm most familiar with. So in Jupyter, what you get a local version control thing, the checkpoints. So basically every time you mess around with your notebook, it will update the checkpoints file. But if you're using Git for version control, you don't particularly care about the checkpoint, and you don't want to commit the checkpoints file to the Git repository. It's like it's a duplication, basically. You're committing one version control file into another version control system. And yeah, Python has some other things it ignores. So this will help you ignore all these things from Git, so Git will never suggest to you to commit them. Someone mentioned dev containers on Matrix. Who was? Yeah. So this is from a course I did. I did a course with this Matt Harrison. Is a very good guy for pandas, for XGBoost, for machine learning, that kind of stuff. And basically, the good thing about one very good use case, I think, for Codespaces is if you're doing a training course or if you're onboarding people, if you want to prepare the platform for them to easily kind of not have to set it up. So it's not so much the individual use I showed so far where I'm doing my own projects. It's, he's doing a course, you have 100 people. He wants all these 100 people to have the same extensions in VS Code. He wants to not just define the requirements file, but actually install all the Python modules that we need for the course. So on the creation of the Codespace, everything will get installed. He even wants to define what the terminal prompt is going to be on Linux. So you put all that in the definition of the dev container in the JSON config, and the moment someone puts the Codespace up, they have that environment you defined for them. And I think, yeah, it's great for courses. It might even be a use case if you have a professional group where you want everybody to have the same environment for development. This is a different course I did, and again, this guy was using not just the dev container JSON, he was using a Docker file as well and a startup shell script as well. So there's a lot of room in there to configure things, to have things to run on creation. I'm not an expert on these things, but they're definitely there. And it's a good use case, I think, for Codespaces. On the downside, a it's cloud infrastructure. Cloud infrastructure is never 100% available, right? It will be 99.9 something % available. This is a case where Azure has problems. As a result, some of the action runners are having problems. In this case, it's the Linux ARM64 ones. Codespaces are showing weird behavior, so you can SSH to them, but VS Code cannot connect to them. So, yeah, you put a professional team on Codespaces, you have to expect that they're not going to be always available. So it's a risk you take as opposed to having a local environment. But it's the same risk you take with any cloud service. Like they will never be up 100%. Or it's up in theory, but you have trouble getting it to connect. So in this case, Jupyter Lab is not quite getting, it's hitting a deadline. So I don't know if you would get more of this if you choose the wrong region. Maybe if you choose a Codespace in America and you're trying to run it in Asia or something, it will spin forever, it will hit the deadline, and it will start giving you errors that, sorry, I couldn't get it going. So yeah, like a little comparison, I think one of the things I would stress as an advantage from Kaggle and Colab is that in Codespaces you get a real open source development environment. You get real VS Code or you get real Jupyter Lab. And both Kaggle and Colab are not that. They're very proprietary Google things that I can show you a few weird errors I've been getting from them later on. Obviously, each one of those has its own integrations. So GitHub, we talked a lot about GitHub integrations. Kaggle is great if you're doing, if you're using Kaggle datasets, if you're submitting entries to Kaggle competitions. The Kaggle notebook makes all this stuff easy for you. The other thing I found is that it's sometimes you get an error and it suggests you should go and do a Kaggle training course on something. So I'll show an example of that later. Colab on the Google Cloud Platform, there is this thing called Colab Enterprise. So if you have if you're a Google Cloud customer, you have your Google Cloud projects, Colab Enterprise will be sitting inside that project. If you have like a virtual perimeter, a virtual private cloud, or you have specific resources like object storage, it will have access to those resources in a way that normal Colab is outside your project. TPUs, GPUs we mentioned, container Dockerfile we mentioned. So, weird things from Colab. I don't know if anybody has come across this. Cell magics in Jupyter, where you basically define that this cell, in this case I'm saying time the cell. So I'm going to put some code in the cell. It's going to run it 10 times, 20 times. And it's going to figure out, okay, average time it runs so many milliseconds, standard deviation so many milliseconds. So it's like a profiling thing for me to tell, is my code good? Is it very variable? Does it take a long time? If I do that thing in Jupyter, it breaks because I've put a comment on top. And Jupyter says you cannot put a comment and then put cell magic. Cell magic goes on top of the cell. So it says you put it in the second line, it has to be a line magic, even though I have 2%. Yeah. And it's saying it should be a line magic. I don't recognize this line magic, so here's an error. Colab doesn't mind. Colab says, okay, you have a comment, then you have a cell magic. Fine, it's a cell magic. I don't know here what the standard dictates. Is it that Jupyter fails to meet the standards, or that it's a Colabism that is outside the standard? I think it's more probably the second. This was a very weird one, which I think they fixed. So I was doing some web scraping back when you could web scrape Wikipedia. If you try web scraping Wikipedia now, you'll get a 403 error because the LLMs have been hitting Wikipedia and their traffic has gone like this and So this is from a couple of years ago. So you could do this thing where you read an HTML table into a pandas data frame, and then if you filter it for some filters work, I was doing this weird filter where I was saying I want the column year to be 1974, and I want the other column to contain F. And at that point, I was getting this very weird error. And I tried the same thing in Jupyter, and it worked. So it was valid code. It was a very valid thing to do. And clearly, there was a bug in Colab that was very much a Colab thing that shouldn't have happened. I think they fixed that now. Kaggle, on the other hand, I mentioned they try and direct you towards the training courses. So I'm doing linear regression, and it's figured out that you have categorical data. So it's immediately telling me, go and do a one-hot encoding tutorial to learn how to deal with categorical data in linear regression. So that's not really a bug necessarily, but it's like it's limiting my options a bit. Maybe I wanted to do, I don't know, XGBoost. Maybe I wanted to do a different solution. It's immediately pushing me towards one-hot encoding. But they have to advertise their courses, I guess. So yeah, whereas Codespaces is your good old Jupyter Lab interface. I'm going to show some examples of what the things on the left do. But yeah, at this point, we're just viewing the local files. And also, I'm going to show a bit of what the things on the right do, because there's a way to turn your notebook into effectively a presentation. That's quite an interesting feature in Jupyter Lab. So one of the things you get is, for example, you can render your Markdown. So you can go open the Markdown file with Markdown Viewer. So this is the raw Markdown file, and that's the viewer on the right. You will show you what kernels you've got running. So if you've got different Python kernels, or you've got a terminal as well, it will list everything there. You might want to restart your kernel, stop your kernel, that kind of stuff. You go to basically the second tab on the left. If you use headers, I think this is something that they got from Colab. Colab did first, and Jupyter Lab copied. You can create like a table of contents, and you can navigate your notebook from the table of contents. And a very good change they did recently was it used to put numbers on everything, and now you can say don't number the top. The top is the title. So if you're doing like a report or a scientific paper or something, the title doesn't have a number. All the sections have a number. So originally we'd give a number to the title as well, so it would always be 1. And then this would be 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, which is a bit silly. So now you get the option of doing that. Yeah, there's this weird thing where you go, basically, you select a cell, and you can say it's a slide, or it's not a slide, it's a notes, or just ignore it. And then when you export, you can export to things like reveal.js slides, and it will basically put the cell you defined as a slide as a new slide in reveal.js. And reveal.js is kind of a web format in the end. You look at it in your browser. I haven't found a way to make it look really good yet, but I think I need to start looking to Pandoc and things like that to properly do it. Extensions. So Jupyter Lab has a whole ecosystem of extensions. The obvious ones are already installed here, Git and the diff one. I've found some useful ones, like I was working with GeoJSON a lot at some point, and there's a GeoJSON extension. It will create nice maps out of your GeoJSON data, but there's all sorts of extensions. So it's another thing you get with having Jupyter Lab on Codespaces, as opposed to using Kaggle or Colab, where you don't have access to this ecosystem of extensions. So yeah, the Git one will look like this. It will have, you'll have your change file. You can commit it, you can stage it, commit it. You can do diffs, figure out what you've changed. The difference here with VS Code is we had this discussion about Microsoft products not working together in the past, earlier today. So because VS Code is Microsoft and GitHub is Microsoft, what VS Code does is not just Git integration, it's GitHub integration. So it will figure out, do you want to open that commit in Git? It will show you the graph of what you've done in Git. It will show you whether your local main or master is the same as the cloud master or not. If the cloud master is in the previous commit, it will show the cloud image further down. So it's very much GitHub integration rather than just Git integration. I don't know if you use VS Code with GitLab or some other provider, or Codeberg or something like this. Has anybody done that? No. I don't know if all these things would work the same way or you would lose half the functionality immediately. Sorry, final slide. Am I going too fast?
No, you're good timing. It's really good timing. Yeah.
Okay, so this is one for you who are not into Jupyter and VS Code. So the other options you get things like Flask and Django. So you could set up a code space for those instead of going for the Jupyter Lab templates. And there's a lot of JavaScript ones as well, C#. So I think pretty much everything there is web development, right? Everything is kind of
Looks like it.
front-end web development. I don't know why.
Jupyter Notebook.
Yeah. So that's the main one I use. But apart from that, everything else is one.
Web, yeah.
Yeah. I guess that's the most popular application. That's the most popular kind of job people get is a front-end developer.
Yeah.
Oh.
Guess.
Or kind of hobby projects. Right. That's about it, I'm afraid. Otherwise, I could give a second presentation about this thing here, but maybe some other time.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That's good. So, I'm going to wait for this thing to turn blue, and then I'm going to ask if anyone's got any questions. Just raise your hand. Oh, there you go. There you go.
I was wondering what the security is like on these containers, because if you're running, whether it's something like Django or Jupyter Lab, you're accessing that over the web. So
Yeah.
how does it kind of lock that down so that nobody else is just stumbling across it?
That's probably a good question because
Thanks, man.
you have the option of SSHing into things, right? So I guess if you're very secure-minded, you could SSH and tunnel through the SSH or something, or
Does it just, with Jupyter, sorry, with Jupyter Lab, does it provide you with a code or anything like that? Does it just give you a URL?
it just
you
pops up
bring
in your
and
browser.
It just pops up in. How exciting!
And the interesting thing, the difference I've noticed is that if you use Jupyter Lab in any other environment, you use a personal access token
Yeah.
when you commit your code, when you push your code. Here you don't. It just knows where your repository is. So I don't know if there's a vulnerability there that once you manage to get into a Jupyter
Sounds
Lab
like
for
sounds
code.
like a JOT thing. Sounds like some sort of Java web token, doesn't it? Because it's in the browser, isn't it? So it must be a session and then a Java web token of some sort.
Yeah. Maybe it's doing some kind of exchange behind the
Yeah.
scenes.
Like a
But then you wouldn't.
WebSockets exchange or something.
You wouldn't get that with Django or something. So if you're
Yeah,
debugging a Django application across the web, potentially you could be revealing some tokens.
Yes. Okay.
There must be a
Yeah,
way
I
around
don't
this.
know,
Quite,
to be
quite
honest.
interesting.
Yeah.
Oh, it's okay. It was a.
It's outside my.
I'll check the
Thank you.
CVs.
Put a question on a GitHub forum. They have like a product section in the discussions. There's GitHub discussions, and you can ask about any of this. So.
Anyone else got any questions? No other questions? Cool. Okay. Well, thanks very much. That was great.